Hey, this is Jessica from GoodEnoughandStuff.com. Let's use some beet juice to dye some cookies pink.
They still taste good.
Yeah, they still taste really good.
So I had some beets, but I didn't really know what to do with them. I noticed that they were really pigmented and juicy, and that made me think of natural dyes. There are two main methods for making beet juice dye. The first is boiling. I peeled and cubed the beet first, which was messy, but some people say you can just boil the beet whole and the skin will just come off easily when it's cooked. I threw the cubed beet into a medium pot with 2 cups of water, or until it's kind of covered, and boiled it until I could stick a fork in it easily. It looks really orange on camera, but it was a lot pinker in person. When they were done, I awkwardly scooped the chunks into a bowl so they splattered everywhere, and then poured the juice into a jar. I ended up with only like a few tablespoons worth, but I didn't really need that much for a cookie recipe. Don't throw the chunks out, they're actually really good. I salted and peppered them and they were delicious. It was the first time I'd had straight boiled beets before, and they taste like a mix between carrot and potato. It dyes your lips a little bit while you eat, which I got a little obsessed with because it's pretty much the exact color of every lipstick I ever buy. There's gotta be someone out there that uses this like a lip stain. I don't know, is that weird? The second main method of getting the dye out of the beet is to grate it. I didn't peel the beet first this time because I was being pretty lazy, and I figured a little skin won't hurt me and I probably won't notice it once it's in there after it's all grated up. So also, I only grated half a beet this time using the finest side of the grater. Then I wrapped all that in a cheesecloth and squeezed the juice into a bowl. It looks so cool and kind of creepy. This would be like a fun thing for Halloween, like when you put your hands in like eyeballs that are really grapes, or in, I don't know, what's the other thing? Intestines that are actually spaghetti. You could do like, I don't know, squeezing blood out of something, but it looks crazy.
It's like a crime scene.
I was trying to not completely dye my hands pink at first, but there's just no other option if you're not actually wearing gloves. Surprise, surprise. Although it does wash off way better than I thought it did. Like, I'm sure it dyes clothes pretty well, but with my hands, I just had to kind of rinse them with some warm water and it came off pretty well. Again, save the shredded beet, don't just throw it out. You can use it in a salad or a soup. It's totally fine to eat raw, or you can cook it. You just treat it like pink grated carrot, and it's super delicious in coleslaw. I totally made a mess trying to pour the juice into another jar. The plus of having crappy stained counters is that you don't really care if they get more stained. The jar on the left is the juice from grating half a beet, and the one on the right is the boiled beet. The grated juice is a little bit pinker, but I didn't really notice a difference in color in the final cookies. You can store the beet juice dye in an airtight container in the fridge for up to 3 days, or you can freeze it and it'll be good for up to a year.
You dwell somewhere, somewhere I know.
Me.
Do you see you now?
Yeah.
You got my neck.
Something so strong. Keep searching, I'm on my way.
Now let's make some cookies. Start with 2 sticks, which is 1 cup of butter, softened. I usually don't have softened butter because I'm not good at planning ahead, and it just feels unreasonable to have to think about butter a couple of hours before you are going to use it. So I just take a shortcut and use the microwave. You can't just stick it in and microwave it, or it'll heat unevenly and be melted in the center but hard on the ends. Every microwave is different, but you have to figure out how to lower the power and then microwave it in small increments. For this microwave, I have to lower the power first to 20, then set it for 20 seconds, and then press start. Then I just do a quarter turn and keep repeating it until it's totally soft. For this microwave, I have to press cook time, set it for 20 or 30 seconds, then press power level 2, then start. So it's a different process. So just play around with your microwave and figure out how it works. By the way, this is what we currently have living on top of our microwave. My oldest loves to make super cool things, and he made these funny little plant guys. Now he just has to finish these other 2 pots. Once your butter is squishy but not melted, it's ready to throw into the mixer. Before we do that though, let's decide if we want to make edible cookie dough bites or regular baked cookies. If you're like me, then you like cookie dough more than you like cookies, and this is a great recipe for that. Since this is already an eggless recipe, you've just got to do one easy thing to make it safe to eat uncooked. Heat treat the flour. Flour is a raw ingredient and can possibly contain things like E. coli and salmonella. It's super easy. All you have to do is preheat the oven to 350, then bake 3 cups of flour in a shallow pan for 3 minutes, stir it around, then bake for an additional 2 minutes. Easy peasy. The nice thing is you can change your mind also and just make regular cookies with the heat-treated flour. It doesn't affect how it bakes, it just kills the germs. Now, while the flour is cooling, cream the softened butter with 1 cup of granulated sugar until light and fluffy.
What's the best thing?
Next, add 1 tablespoon of the beet juice, 2 tablespoons of sour cream, and 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. I bought some really fancy vanilla paste to see if it improves the flavor, but the only difference in my opinion was that it smelled a lot more like vanilla and kind of boozy too a little bit, but the taste wasn't really any different, and I certainly don't think it's better than the really cheap stuff I usually buy.
You okay over there?
Use a spatula or just take the paddle out and scrape down the sides and mix it again a little bit more. Once it's all mixed in, dump the flour in all at once, plus the 1 teaspoon of baking powder and 1 teaspoon of salt. This is how I measure salt. I just pour it and flatten it with the bottom of the salt container, and any extra just spills out. It's okay to be messy. Just don't do it over your bowl. The aim is to mix the dough a bunch before you add the flour, and then mix it as little as possible after you add the flour. This is a good practice for cookies, cakes, brownies, anything where you don't want it to be stretchy. Over-mixing once you add the flour will give you gummy cookies with an unpleasant texture. Once the dough is mixed, it should be the texture of Play-Doh.
Do you still know? Do you still know?
To make the cookie dough bites, you can either roll it into balls, cut it into squares, or squish it into some silicone candy molds to be extra fancy. Throw the dough into the freezer to chill, and you want it to be really solid if you chose to use those intricate silicone molds. They should pop out pretty well, and then you can just coat them in whatever chocolate you like. This is my favorite dipping chocolate. You can usually find it over in the produce section, like right around Valentine's Day. I like this chocolate because it has kind of a unique and delightful flavor. It melts and sets up really easily without having to mess with tempering or anything finicky, and it doesn't leave like a waxy coating in your mouth like some other cheap chocolate does. All you have to do is take off the lid, pull off the plastic, then microwave it normally for 30 seconds. Mix it really well to even out the heat, then melt it again for 30 seconds and mix again. Now you can drop the dough in the chocolate, then use a fork to fish it out, and make sure to tap the extra chocolate off before setting it on some parchment paper to set. Don't just put it on a plate, you won't be able to get it off. While the chocolate is still wet, you can drag a fork across the top to make these 3 lines, and then it looks really fancy. Now let's bake some cookies. Preheat the oven to 350 degrees. To get all the cookies to be the same thickness, you want to find 2 things that are about how thick you want your cookies to be, like sticks, 2 knives, dowels, pieces of wood. These will basically act as rolling pin spacers. For the last several years, I've used some leftover siding from a dollhouse I never finished. I've got 2 on each side and I wrap them in plastic. They make perfect cookies that are about 3/8 of an inch thick, and I just love it. So grab your spacers and place them on either side of your work surface, and then add a sheet of parchment paper, then some of your dough, then another piece of parchment paper. Make sure your spacers aren't farther than your rolling pin on the sides, and then you just start rolling the dough. The rolling pin should rest on the spacers as you roll back and forth. This is a great setup for any time you have rollout cookies because it keeps your counter, your rolling pin, and your spacers clean. It also means you don't need to add more flour to keep the dough from sticking to the table, which means you're not altering your recipe by adding more and more flour to it as you roll it out. Because I like thick cookies, I also like thick cookie cutters. This heart one came in a set of different sizes, but it's so slim that it works better for like thin, crunchy cookies or just like playing with Play-Doh. I like these cookie cutters because they also came in a set of different sizes, but they're thick and double-sided. And this plunger cookie is cool because it's thick and you can stamp the top of the cookie at the same time. Awesome. As you're rolling out the dough in between, try not to work it too much because of the flour making it gummy eventually, but don't get too worried about overworking the dough. It's just cookies. Just squish the scraps, add more dough, and keep going. The difference it makes is not that noticeable, your kids won't care, and it still tastes great. Cut your cookies out and place them on a parchment-lined baking sheet. These cookies don't rise much and keep their shape really well, so you can place them pretty close together and they won't bake into each other. Bake for about 10 minutes or until the bottom is golden, and the baking time will vary a little bit depending on how big or small your cookie shapes are. Did you know that you can also take those same silicone candy molds and bake the dough in those? I sprayed one, but I'm pretty sure you don't need to do that. And then you can either bake them on a baking tray or just straight on the rack. Just make sure they're silicone and not plastic. These little cookies were a little less pink than the others though, and I'm not sure if it's because they were so much smaller than the other ones, or because the beet juice was a couple of days older than the other batches, or if I just baked them a little bit too long, but they were more like a light tan than pink. Still really pretty, and they kept their shape really well. Let all your cookies cool and then you can eat them just like this, or you can dip them in chocolate.
They still taste good.
Yeah, they still taste really good.
Heat the chocolate just like before. If you want a thinner coat of chocolate, you can just add a spoonful of shortening and melt it in. Don't add water, it'll just seize up and be chunky. It's gotta be some sort of oil substance.
Well, it kind of worked.
A little bit.
I also tried putting some dipping chocolate back into the silicone mold and then shoving the cookie back into that. And then you kind of have to wipe off the excess off of the back. Once it was set up, it looked pretty cool and the details were really sharp, but it didn't work for all of them.
Got me all chocolatey. More.
It's very messy. What do you think? You like it?
You can dip half the cookie, which looks cool, or my favorite was to coat the bottom of the cookie so you can still see the whole design, but you get chocolate with every bite. Or you can just drizzle the chocolate over the cookies and call it good. That works too.
Do you still know? Do you still know?
Hey, thanks for watching my video. I hope you liked it. So I was going to try and do this video for Valentine's Day, and I was going to do like, oh, the things that I love a lot. And one of the things that I was going to say was, do you still know that the Beethoven movies from when we were kids are still great? The first and the second one, I don't know about the other ones, but we've been watching them in our cars. We drive around the last like month or so, and I've just been like listening to them and just watching little snippets here and there, but they are still delightful and so great. And so many movies you go back and watch are just not that great anymore. Or like they were cool for the time, or like when you were a kid it was great, but then you go back and you're like, ugh, this was awful. What a terrible movie. Like it's so cringy and you can't stand it. But these ones, like they made me laugh and they're so heartwarming, and I love the parents. They're just great and their relationship is great, and their kids are just, they're all learning lessons together, and just great family movies. They're still really, really good, like classics. So you should check those out. That is on my mind recently of things that I love. So what are some things that you love? Obviously, my husband and my kids are going to be at the top of that list, but also Beethoven has been at the top. I did plan on getting this video out before Thanksgiving. No, not Thanksgiving. What am I talking about? I did plan on getting this video out before Valentine's Day, And I did get the blog post out, so if you want the printable recipe, it is already out on my blog. It's on goodenoughandstuff.com, and you can print the recipe for free. Just look up the best eggless sugar cookies beet dye, I think is what I called it. So